All right, so let's talk about the plants first. This is a project being led by my PhD student Simeon Adebola and a number of others. And the challenge is we want to be able to develop a three-dimensional, actually four-dimensional digital twin of plants. And this is for biologists who are very interested in studying how plants vary as they grow under slightly different conditions. So the so here's an outline. I'll just jump into the motivation, which is phenotyping. So for those who don't know, phenotyping is basically where you're trying to understand what are you're trying to optimize some sort of observable features of your plant. And it may largely it's used to be how much food it will produce, the fruit or vegetable quantity, but also you want to make sure it's resilient to water changes or different kinds of fertilizers. So there's a lot of interest in this. It's a global issue because of climate change, but it's been going on for a long time. Breeding of plants, selective breeding, has been something that's been done for 10,000 years. And today it's a very big business. It's growing rapidly. And again, because of challenges for plant growth under the changing climate conditions. So the way this has been done for years is humans basically do a lot of experimentation in the field. They'll modify small factors like the amount of water or the amount of fertilizer and monitor the results visually. The idea of high throughput is that we want to be able to do this more systematically and at a higher scale. So just like high throughput screening for drug discovery, the idea is you want to have these new large systems and you want to be able to monitor what's going on in each plant over time. So this is where the digital twin aspect comes in, because you want to be able to model something as close as possible. And it's very challenging when it's a plant because there's so many degrees of freedom. So this is the challenge. And so what we've been working with is Siemens Corporation, who's been obviously I think everyone knows them, and they have an agriculture division, so they're very interested in this. And we're also working with the Netherlands Plant Eco Phenotyping Center, NPEC, and this is one of the largest centers in Europe for doing phenotyping. They have a really elaborate system set up where they have many plants, and each plant is on conveyors that get brought into these scanner systems that then scan each plant with 15 cameras every day. So the idea is you want to be able to monitor. Each one of these are subject to ever so slight growing differences. And so you get them brought into this large machine that has cameras set up. And then that post rises up, it gets photographed from all these different angles, and then moved down, and the next plant comes in. So they're looking at things, for example, like this giant sequoia tree, trying to understand how that tree responds to changes in irrigation or moisture level. And so this is an example of the kind of data that they've collected. So they have a plant growing at the early stage of a sequoia, and then you see those are the 15 cameras at 3 different days when it was sampled. Now, the way it's working right now is that the biologists look at each of those and then try to understand minute differences between the plant over time and compare that with other plants. And it's a very tedious process, as you can imagine. You're trying to look at each little detail because they're really trying to see how fast does it grow, how does it grow regularly, et cetera. The other subject that we've been looking at with them is quinoa. I think everyone's familiar with that. It's an ancient grain that was rediscovered and is very popular. Again, the hope is to make it somewhat to insulate it against climate change. So again, this is what those cameras look like from the early stage on the far left to later stages on the right. So here's what we're trying to do. There's other people who have looked at this in different literatures, trying to model plants in various ways. We have actually been looking at using Gaussian splats. So if you're familiar with NERF, the neural radiance field, The idea is to build a neural model, a volumetric model of a scene. And the Gaussian splat is a nice extension. Most people have adopted it, where you actually you're rendering small Gaussians that are actually projected right onto the surfaces of your scene. So you get a much more compact representation and much higher resolution. So both of them give you these viewpoint invariant capabilities, so it can interpolate using the interpolation properties of networks to different viewpoints, and it looks very smooth, and you can really zoom in and round to different perspectives. So what we want here is to be able to take that data from NPEC and then generate these Gaussian splats, but then also be able to extend them over time. So the first thing we found was that there was a huge problem of calibration. And so they had sent us the specs for all the cameras and the positions, but they were off just by a few centimeters, but it was enough to really throw off our rendering. So this is what the Gaussian splat looked like initially. And you can see it's just very noisy, and it's doing the best it can, but it basically has slightly incorrect camera positions. So it's not able to solve the inverse problem of generating these images. So then we spent a lot of time trying to fix that. And so one idea is to mask out the actual surfaces of the leaves. We're able to learn a mask and then apply that, which did fairly well. But then you still see these sometimes called floaters, and they're sort of artifacts that come into Gaussian splats because of slight errors. And so then we were able to train with a point cloud on this particular plant. And when we combine that with the mask, we actually ended up getting this, which is very surprising quality of the plant three-dimensional structure. So then we could synthesize viewpoints. So as we continuously rotate the plant around with the Gaussian splat, you can see it follows. And it seems as if you have a basically continuous, even though you're only taking 15 camera images, you can show it from any viewpoint. So then the next step is to address the 4D aspect, because we build one of these for each day. Not every day, by the way, it's every couple days, but then you want to be able to show how it grows over time. So here you have an additional issue because you have these three-dimensional models. Each one is slightly different, and then you have to register them in some way. So that's actually fairly tricky because, again, plants have no easily defined coordinate frames. So you look for some kind of stem structures that you can carry over from the previous days, and then you try to register on those. So here's the result. I'm actually really, this was basically, now we're showing it. If you watch carefully, it's going to grow over time. Well, actually, that's one day. Here's it moving, and you can see that it's growing, but you're able to watch it. And here's another 3 days of the quinoa. And now we're trying to basically time align these and then show this, which is, if you watch carefully, the idea is that this should grow. Let's see, do I have it right? This should grow over time. So we changed this. We showed this to the biologists, who were really excited because this was the first time they had seen their plants actually in this kind of way, showing them growing over time. Because that is exactly what they're looking for, is that intuition of how the plant grows in space and time. And they can very carefully study each plant and observe very small changes over time to understand what is the best way to grow them. Okay, so that's the first half of my talk. There's some dirty laundry here. I also want to say that this is slow. It's not a very fast process. In this case, it's not that critical because we can process these. It's not like there's nothing urgent. Usually it can take hours to do. And there's some heuristics that are involved in the alignment that are it's not guaranteed to work in all cases. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears to robot learning application. And this is a paper that, very new result, something that we call Real2Render2Real. So this is relevant to the digital twin idea, as you'll see in a moment. So we're noting that there's a large gap in the amount of data available for robotics as compared to LLM data. In fact, we estimate that to be about on the order of 100,000 years. So where do we get the data? And I'll be talking about this more in detail tomorrow in a plenary at 2 o'clock. But the one source is human teleop. Everybody's familiar with that. There's been quite a bit of effort there. YouTube video is another possible source. World models, it's called now. Simulation works extremely well for UAVs and also for locomotion. But manipulation is extremely hard to simulate. And so that has been a real bottleneck to get high quality data for robot manipulation from simulation. So one idea that we've been looking at is that there's certain kinds of tasks that we might call quasi-static, where the forces are not very important, that what's really important is position of the objects. And you can treat them, you can ignore essentially the forces to some degree. Now, that actually covers a fair amount of these simple manipulation pick and place tasks that you see, for example, here. And if you look at that subset, we'll call it the quasi-static and maybe short horizon set of tasks, then it turns out that these are actually can be modeled with taking out the dynamics. If you have a simulator like this, there's usually a fairly sophisticated physics model inside that models the forces. But if you ignore that and just use the graphic element of that, we'll call that the rendering component of the simulation. Well, our hypothesis is that is actually gives you very nice visual images, and you can then, that seems to overlap very nicely with that subset of manipulation tasks. In other words, that for these tasks, we may not need all of the sophistication of force models. So that is the basis of what we're calling Real2Render2Real, because we're not simulating with the full force dynamics. We're just simulating with rendering. And the idea is that we can take a real demonstration, we can use that, we can extract from that a 3D model, and then generate render many different demonstrations from the single demonstration with slight variations, use those to then train a policy that then goes back and runs on the real robot. So here again is the real step. We scan the object. So the idea, think of it this way, a use case might be that in the future, you have a robot at your home and you buy a new coffee maker, and now you want to have the robot make coffee with that. You don't want to teleop the robot to make coffee and do a lot of complicated training on this. Let's imagine it's your grandmother or something. So here's all she needs to do is take a scan of her new appliance and a scan of an object like her coffee mug. And then we build a Gaussian splat from that. And again, this is standard tools now. You can get these off the shelf, but we're also using something called Garfield that we developed, which segments Gaussian splats. And then you do a single demonstration. So you're just going to use your hand, not a robot, but you're just going to demonstrate something like this is where the coffee mug goes. And then basically the system will, since it has a model of the object, it will build a trajectory in space for that object. And then it will also build a mesh and generate more than one trajectory. So it's going to figure out where the hand pose is, in other words, where the gripper needs to go, and then render many trajectories for this. So for your robot. So again, it depends on what kind of robot model you have. You know the spatial motion of the object, you know where the grip points were. So now you can generate the motion of your robot to perform that same task. Then you also want to show that with different initial conditions and also from your camera. So cameras can be different than where you took the original video, and you can transform the camera view accordingly as well. And then you can do some domain randomization of the initial conditions so that you're showing that you're varying lighting, camera pose, object pose, etc. And for each of those, generating a family of trajectories for the different inputs that will, again, you've only given it one demonstration, but it's synthesizing rendering many different trajectories. And then basically you can use that to train it for your robot. So you have maybe a pre-trained VLA that it may work for different embodiments, but you can plug that in for your embodiment and it will generate motions like this. So here's that system running on, from a single demonstration, we were able to get it to run on our Yumi robot, and then we could also get it to run on a Franca. So this is showing you some generalization from different embodiments, robot embodiments, different grippers, and slightly different trajectories. So we've been doing experiments with other things, again, in this class of quasi-static and quasi-static manipulation. And again, randomizing, but these are all cases where force does not seem to be that critical. So we don't try to model forces at all, just positions. And the rendering seems to work fairly well. This is showing you that if we did human teleoperation to train these tasks, it would take much, much longer. So the data, to generate the data for, let's say, 150 demonstrations might take an hour and a half. That's the yellow line. To get up to about a 65, 70% success rate. Whereas with a single demonstration and then doing the compute on a remote GPUs, we can get this in a matter of 15 minutes or half an hour. We can get 1,000 demonstrations and get up to about 80%, 75, 80% success rate. Still not 100%, of course, but we can basically get the same, if not better, than we would if we just spent all that time collecting human data. So we're not claiming that dynamics is not important, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make that argument, just that for there's certain classes of tasks it seems like we don't need them. And there are cases like this where dynamics is going to be very important, where you do have to think about the forces and the deformations. So we're not dealing with those. This is, again, is quasi-static rigid objects. And we haven't experimented with retargeting this to dexterous or humanoid hands. So it's just with binary robotics. But this is, let's say, a Sharpa, how you might do something like this, which we have not considered yet. And then we also haven't tried to optimize the trajectories. We're just trying to get interpolation. So the trajectories are fairly straightforward in this case. So that's the limitations, and I'll stop here. This is just another scenario where, again, you would have the system modified to do domain randomization for, let's say, your kitchen. And again, the objective is to get your robot in your house to be able to reliably perform that task. Okay, so I'll stop, and I'm happy to take any questions.